Yes, I really caught my cheating husband during a food delivery. And yes, I really put laxatives in his favorite tacos. But what I haven't told you yet is that when his girlfriend called 911 and they rushed him to the hospital, I showed up pretending to be the worried wife. And what happened next in that emergency room was so devastating that she ran away and never spoke to him again. But before I tell you exactly how I destroyed his affair and his reputation in one perfect move, subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss any of the incredible stories we tell here. Have you subscribed yet? Now, let me tell you how a simple food delivery changed my entire life and gave me the perfect opportunity for the most satisfying revenge. My name is Valentina Cruz, and for 12 years I thought I knew exactly who I was married to. At 35, I wake up every morning in our small apartment above Mrs. Gonzalez's bakery in Queens, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood coming to life. The smell of fresh bread drifts up through our floorboards, mixing with the aroma of coffee from the Cuban cafe next door. This has been my world for almost a decade now, and I thought it was perfect. I've been working at Casa Morales, a family-owned Mexican restaurant just 3 blocks away, for almost 8 years. What started as a temporary job to help pay bills became my second home, my sanctuary, my place in this enormous city. When delivery apps became popular 2 years ago, I volunteered to do the driving too. The extra money never hurt, especially with Roberto's irregular schedule as an HVAC technician. Some months were good, others were tight, but we always managed to make ends meet together. Roberto seemed like everything a woman could want in a husband when we first met at my cousin Maria's quinceañera 13 years ago. He was handsome in that rugged, working man way that made my heart skip. His hands were calloused from honest work, his smile was genuine, and he treated me like a queen from our very first dance. He wasn't the richest man at the party, or the most educated. But he was real. He worked hard, came home every night, and never made me feel like I wasn't enough. When he proposed after a year of dating, I said yes without hesitation. We had a small wedding at St. Miguel's Church, with reception at Casa Morales. Mr. and Mrs. Morales insisted on catering for free, treating me like the daughter they never had. Roberto looked so handsome in his rented tuxedo, promising to love and cherish me forever. I believed every word he said, trusted him completely with my heart and my future. Our early years of marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. We were young, in love, and building a life together, one paycheck at a time. Roberto would wake up at dawn, kiss my forehead gently, and head out to fix air conditioning units across the 5 boroughs. Got another day, another dollar. Mi amor, he'd say, grabbing his worn leather toolbox and thermos of coffee. I'd pack him lunch every morning, usually leftovers from the restaurant that Mrs. Morales let me take home. We'd talk about our dreams, maybe buying a little house in Jersey someday, starting a family, taking that trip to Mexico to meet his grandmother. Simple dreams, but they felt achievable when we were working toward them together. Roberto would come home tired but satisfied, telling me stories about his day while I massaged his shoulders and we watched novelas on our secondhand TV. The routine that developed over the years became comfortable, predictable, and precious to me. Monday through Wednesday, Roberto worked regular maintenance jobs around Queens and Brooklyn, apartment buildings, small businesses, elderly customers who trusted him to be fair and honest. He built a reputation as the guy who wouldn't overcharge, who'd explain what was wrong in simple terms, who'd show up when he said he would. Thursdays became his premium client days, the wealthy Manhattan customers who paid top dollar for emergency service. These rich people, he'd complain good-naturedly, they have no patience. Their AC breaks and suddenly it's a life-or-death emergency. He'd shake his head, but I could see he was proud that these demanding clients specifically requested him. The Thursday jobs paid almost as much as 3 regular days combined, which meant we could afford little luxuries like dinner out occasionally, or new clothes when we needed them. I started making Roberto's favorite lunch every Thursday about 5 years ago, carnitas tacos with extra salsa verde and lime. wrapped carefully in foil to keep them warm. It became our little tradition, my way of showing love and support for the extra effort those difficult clients required. "You spoil me, Valentina," he'd say, kissing me before heading out. "These tacos give me energy to deal with the crazy rich people." I'd laugh and tell him he deserved to be spoiled, that he worked harder than any man I knew. Those Thursdays were special because Roberto always seemed lighter when he came home, more relaxed and affectionate. The stress of dealing with demanding customers seemed to melt away, and we'd spend Thursday evenings planning our weekend, talking about our future, making love like newlyweds. I attributed his good mood to the satisfaction of a job well done and the generous pay those clients provided. The changes started so gradually that I didn't notice them at first. About 6 months ago, Roberto began paying more attention to his appearance on Thursday mornings. He'd spend extra time in the shower, use more cologne than usual, make sure his work shirt was perfectly clean. "Got to look professional for the high-end clients," he'd explain when I teased him about his vanity. A bottle of expensive cologne appeared in our bathroom, Armani Code, which cost more than I made in tips some weeks. "I found it cheap at one of those discount stores," he said when I asked about it. I didn't question it because Roberto had always been honest with me about money, about everything. The cologne smelled sophisticated, masculine, nothing like the Old Spice he'd worn since I'd known him. But I figured if looking good made him feel more confident with wealthy clients, it was worth the investment. Our relationship felt solid, unshakable, built on a foundation of trust that I never thought to question. When Roberto said he had to work late, I believed him without hesitation. When he said some clients were demanding and needed weekend emergency service, I supported him completely. "You're such a dedicated worker, baby," I'd tell him while rubbing his shoulders after particularly long days. "These people are lucky to have someone so reliable." He'd pull me close and tell me how much my support meant to him, how he couldn't do any of it without me believing in him. I felt proud to be married to a man with such a strong work ethic, such integrity. My friends at the restaurant would complain about their lazy boyfriends or unreliable husbands, and I'd think how lucky I was to have Roberto. He was my rock, my partner, my best friend. I trusted him with my life, my heart, my future. The idea that he might betray that trust never crossed my mind, not even for a second. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September when my entire world shifted on its axis, and everything I believed about my life revealed itself to be a lie. The date is burned into my memory, September 28th, because it was the day I stopped being the naive, trusting wife and became something else entirely, Mrs. Morales had asked me to cover a last-minute delivery to the Upper East Side, one of those fancy Manhattan addresses that usually meant good tips and wealthy customers who ordered enough food for small parties. "Big order, mija," she said, loading my arms with multiple bags of our best dishes. Apartment 4B in that glass tower on 82nd Street. They called specifically asking for extra guacamole and our premium margarita mix. Must be having some kind of celebration. I grabbed my delivery bag and thermal containers, thinking this would be just another routine run to Manhattan, another chance to see how the other half lived in their spotless high-rise buildings with doormen and marble lobbies. The building was exactly what I expected from that neighborhood, all glass and steel, with a uniformed doorman who looked me up and down disapprovingly before checking his list to confirm I was expected. The lobby was intimidating, with its polished marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than I made in a year. I felt underdressed in my Casa Morales uniform, the bright red polo shirt with embroidered logo and black pants that were practical but definitely not fashionable. The elevator was lined with mirrors, and I caught glimpses of myself from every angle as it climbed to the 4th floor. I was thinking about the grocery list I needed to make for dinner, wondering if we had enough rice at home, when the elevator dinged and the doors began to slide open. That's when I saw him, and my entire world came crashing down around me like those controlled building demolitions you see on TV. Roberto. My Roberto. My faithful, hard-working, devoted husband of 12 years was walking out of apartment 4B with his arm around a tall, stunning blonde woman, wearing nothing but a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly salary. They were laughing together, completely absorbed in each other, and she was touching his chest in a way that spoke of intimacy, of familiarity, of countless other moments just like this one. He was wearing the expensive Armani cologne I'd been smelling on him for months, and his hair was tousled in that way it gets after being in bed. The woman was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, blonde where I was brunette, sophisticated where I was simple. They looked like they belonged together in that expensive hallway, like a couple from a magazine advertisement for the good life. For a moment that felt like an eternity. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what my eyes were showing me. I stood there frozen in the elevator, holding bags of Mexican food, watching my husband of 12 years kiss another woman goodbye like it was the most natural thing in the world. The kiss wasn't quick or casual. It was deep, passionate, the kind of kiss that speaks of love and longing and promises to see each other again soon. When they finally broke apart, the woman said something that made Roberto laugh, and the sound of his laughter, my Roberto's laughter, in the arms of another woman felt like a physical blow to my chest. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a relationship, a full-blown affair that had been going on long enough for them to be completely comfortable with each other. They didn't see me standing there in the elevator, watching my entire life fall apart. The woman went back into her apartment, trailing her fingers along Roberto's arm until the last possible second. Roberto stood there for a moment, straightening his shirt and running his hands through his hair, that satisfied smile on his face that I thought belonged only to me. Then he headed toward the stairwell, probably to avoid running into anyone in the elevator. The doors started to close automatically, and I let them. I couldn't face him right now. Couldn't trust myself not to scream or cry or do something that would give away the fact that I'd seen everything. I rode back down to the lobby in complete shock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the delivery bags. The doorman looked at me with concern when the elevator opened again. "You okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. The ghost of my marriage, the ghost of my trust, the ghost of the man I thought I knew. I sat in the marble lobby for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd just witnessed, trying to make sense of the impossible. My Roberto, who complained constantly about entitled rich clients and their unreasonable demands, was obviously very comfortable in that expensive apartment with that beautiful woman. The Thursday emergency calls that had been happening for months suddenly made perfect sense, and I felt like the biggest fool in New York City for not seeing the signs. The new cologne, the extra attention to his appearance, the way he'd been more distant lately but happier after his Thursday appointments. It all clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see. I thought about all the Thursday nights when he'd come home relaxed and affectionate, all the times I'd felt grateful for his hard work, all the times I'd made his favorite tacos to fuel him for another day of dealing with difficult clients. When I finally gathered the courage to take the elevator back up to apartment 4B, my hands were still trembling as I knocked on the door. The blonde woman answered, now dressed in designer clothes that looked effortlessly elegant, the kind of outfit I could never afford and wouldn't know how to put together even if I could. "Oh, the Mexican food." "Perfect timing," she said with a bright, genuine smile that made me hate her even more because she seemed nice, seemed like someone I might have liked under different circumstances. "I'm Stephanie Morrison. Sorry about the delay. I had a maintenance guy here fixing my air conditioning. These old buildings, even the expensive ones have their problems." She tipped me generously, a crisp $50 bill that was probably nothing to her but represented half a day's wages for me. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the maintenance guy was my husband, completely unaware that she had just destroyed my entire world with her casual friendliness. The drive back to Queens was the longest 25 minutes of my life, a blur of tears and rage and disbelief that made it dangerous for me to be behind the wheel. I had to pull over twice, once to throw up in a McDonald's parking lot, and once to sit in my car and sob until I couldn't breathe. The betrayal hit me in waves, each one more devastating than the last. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of trust, 12 years of believing that Roberto and I were partners building a life together, and it had all been a lie. How long had this been going on? How many other emergency calls had actually been visits to Stephanie's apartment? How many times had I packed his lunch with love and care, sending him off to cheat on me with energy from the food I'd prepared with my own hands? The questions swirled in my mind like a tornado, destroying everything I thought I knew about my life. By the time I made it back to Casa Morales, I had cried so hard that my eyes were swollen, and my mascara had left black streaks down my cheeks. Mrs. Morales took one look at my face and immediately pulled me into her office, closing the door behind us. "Mija, what happened?" "You look like someone died." In a way, someone had, the woman I used to be, the trusting wife who believed in her husband's faithfulness. I broke down completely, telling her everything I'd seen, every detail of Roberto's betrayal. Mrs. Morales held me while I sobbed, stroking my hair and murmuring comforting words in Spanish. "Ese cabrón," she whispered fiercely. "That bastard doesn't deserve you, Valentina. You're worth 10 of him." She sent me home early with a container of my favorite soup and strict instructions to take care of myself, but I knew I wouldn't be able to eat anything for hours. That night was the most surreal experience of my life, lying in bed next to the man who had betrayed me while pretending everything was normal. Roberto came home at his usual Thursday time, around 8 p.m., looking relaxed and satisfied in a way that now made my stomach turn. "How was your day, mi amor?" he asked, kissing my cheek with lips that had been on another woman just hours before. "Had a really difficult emergency call today. Some rich lady's AC system completely broke down. Took me most of the afternoon to fix it, but she paid very well." The lies rolled off his tongue so easily, so naturally, that I wondered how many other lies I'd believed over the years. I managed to smile and nod, playing the part of the caring wife, while inside I was screaming. When he went to shower, washing off her scent, I realized, I buried my face in my pillow and cried as quietly as possible. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed from a trusting wife into a detective in my own marriage, paying attention to details I'd previously ignored or explained away. Roberto's phone, which used to lie casually on our kitchen counter, was now always face down and within his reach. He'd changed his passcode from our anniversary date to something I didn't know. When it buzzed with text messages, he'd grab it quickly and step into another room to read them. His work clothes, which used to smell like sweat and machine oil, now carried traces of expensive perfume that definitely wasn't mine. I started checking our bank account online and found cash withdrawals I couldn't account for. $50 here, $100 there, always on Thursdays. When I casually asked about his regular Thursday client, Roberto became defensive in a way that was completely unlike him. "Why all the questions, Val? Since when do you care about the boring details of my work?" I became obsessed with learning everything I could about Stephanie Morrison, spending hours online researching the woman who was destroying my marriage. It wasn't hard to find her. She had a professional LinkedIn profile, a Facebook page with privacy settings that weren't quite tight enough, and an Instagram account full of photos from expensive restaurants and weekend trips. She was 32, a financial consultant with her own practice, graduated from Columbia Business School. Her life looked perfect from the outside. Successful career, beautiful apartment, designer clothes, exotic vacations. I scrolled through months of her photos, looking for any sign of Roberto, any clue about how long this had been going on. In a picture from Augusty, I spotted a familiar watch on a man's wrist at the edge of the frame. Roberto's watch, the one I'd given him for his birthday 3 years ago. The investigation consumed me, but it also gave me purpose and focus beyond the pain of betrayal. I started paying attention to patterns, noting that Roberto's mood was always better on Thursday evenings, that he'd started buying nicer underwear and using mouthwash more frequently. I found receipts in his pants pockets for restaurants I'd never been to, expensive places in Manhattan that were clearly date spots. One receipt was for 2 meals and a bottle of wine that cost more than we usually spent on groceries in a week. I took pictures of everything with my phone, building a case without really knowing what I planned to do with the evidence. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and cry and demand explanations. But a bigger part of me wanted to be smart about this, to make sure that when I revealed what I knew, it would have maximum impact. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the realization of how stupid I'd been, how many signs I'd missed or rationalized away. Roberto's sudden interest in fitness 6 months ago, the new cologne, the way he'd started commenting on other women's appearances when we watched TV together. "She's pretty, but not as beautiful as you, mi amor," he'd say, and I'd felt flattered instead of suspicious. The expensive dinners he claimed were work celebrations, the new confidence in his voice when he talked about his premium clients, the way he'd started taking his phone into the bathroom with him. It all seemed so obvious now that I knew the truth. I felt like the classic cliché of the naive wife who's the last to know about her husband's affair, and that almost hurt worse than the cheating itself. As the days passed and I gathered more evidence of Roberto's double life, a cold anger began to replace the initial shock and heartbreak. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. This was a calculated, ongoing deception that had been happening for months, maybe longer. Roberto had looked me in the eye every day, accepted my love and support and trust, while systematically betraying everything our marriage was supposed to represent. He'd eaten the food I prepared with love, slept in the bed I kept clean and comfortable, accepted my emotional and financial support, all while planning his next visit to another woman's arms. The Roberto I'd married, the man I'd trusted with my heart and my future, was either gone or had never existed in the first place. Either way, he didn't deserve my tears or my loyalty any longer. The plan came to me during a busy Thursday lunch rush at Casa Morales, when I was watching Mrs. Morales carefully measure ingredients for a customer with severe food allergies. She was explaining to her daughter how important it was to be precise with measurements, how even a small amount of the wrong ingredient could cause serious problems. That's when I remembered the bottle of extra-strength laxative sitting in our medicine cabinet at home. Roberto had bought it months ago when he was constipated from eating too much fast food during a particularly busy work week. The idea hit me like lightning. So simple and perfect that I almost laughed out loud in the middle of the crowded restaurant. Roberto was a creature of habit, and I was going to use his most cherished habit to destroy him in the most humiliating way possible. I spent the next several days researching everything I could about laxatives, dosages, timing, and effects. I needed to be absolutely certain that my plan would work without causing any permanent harm. I wanted to humiliate Roberto, not actually hurt him. According to my research, the extra-strength formula he'd bought would take approximately 2 to 4 hours to take effect, depending on the person's metabolism and what they'd eaten. Roberto always ate his carnitas tacos at noon before his Thursday appointments, usually arrived at Stephanie's apartment around 2 p.m. And based on the timing of his previous emergency calls, they typically spent several hours together. If I timed it perfectly, the laxative would hit him right in the middle of their intimate time together, creating the most embarrassing and relationship-destroying scenario I could imagine. The beauty of my plan was its poetic justice. Roberto had poisoned our marriage with his lies and betrayal, and I was going to poison his affair with something much more literal. For years, I'd been preparing his Thursday tacos with love, pride, and care, wanting to give him energy and strength for what I thought was demanding work. Now I would prepare them with the same care and attention to detail, but with a very different purpose. The irony was delicious. The meal that had become a symbol of my devotion would become the instrument of his downfall. Roberto would never be able to eat my cooking again without wondering if I'd added something special to it. And more importantly, Stephanie would never be able to look at him the same way after what was about to happen. I practiced my innocent wife routine for days, rehearsing the phone calls I would make and receive, the concerned spouse act I would perform when Roberto's food poisoning struck. I planned every detail meticulously, what I would wear to the hospital, something that made me look worried but dignified, what I would say to Stephanie when I discovered her existence, how I would handle the questions from medical staff. I even researched which hospital they would most likely go to from Stephanie's apartment, mapping out the fastest route so I could arrive at the perfect moment. This wasn't just revenge, it was performance art, and I intended to give the performance of my lifetime. The psychological aspect of my plan was just as important as the physical one. Roberto's affair wasn't just about sex, it was about power, about having something secret and exciting that was just his. Stephanie represented everything I wasn't: sophisticated, wealthy, independent, mysterious. She was his escape from our ordinary life, his proof that he was desirable and successful enough to attract a woman like her. But after what I was planning, Roberto would be forever associated in her mind with the most disgusting and humiliating experience of her life. No amount of charm or good looks or expensive cologne would be able to erase the memory of what was about to happen in her beautiful apartment. I also began preparing for the aftermath of my revenge, researching divorce lawyers and gathering financial documents. If Roberto suspected that I'd deliberately poisoned him, I needed to be ready for war. I photographed all of our important papers, transferred half of our joint savings to a new account in my name only, and started documenting his assets and income. Mrs. Morales helped me contact her nephew Miguel, who was a paralegal, and he put me in touch with Maria Santos, a divorce attorney who specialized in cases involving adultery. When this all comes out, Maria told me during our consultation, you'll want to file immediately while the circumstances are fresh and embarrassing for him. Public humiliation can be a powerful motivator for reasonable settlement negotiations. The week before I planned to execute my revenge, I also began reaching out to our mutual friends and family members, not to tell them about Roberto's affair, but to lay groundwork for the aftermath. I started mentioning casually that Roberto had been working late a lot, that I sometimes worried about him, that marriage took work and commitment from both partners. I wasn't accusing him of anything yet, but I was planting seeds of doubt that would bloom into understanding when the truth came out. Our neighbor, Mrs. Gutierrez, who had always liked Roberto, started making comments about how men sometimes get confused in middle age, how women need to be strong and protect themselves. Without directly telling anyone what I'd discovered, I was building a support network for what was coming. The night before my planned revenge, I lay awake next to Roberto, watching him sleep peacefully while my mind raced with final preparations. He looked so innocent in sleep, so much like the man I'd fallen in love with 13 years ago. For a moment, I almost reconsidered, almost woke him up to give him one last chance to confess and beg for forgiveness. But then I remembered the image of him kissing Stephanie goodbye, the lies he'd told me just hours earlier about his difficult client, the months of deception and betrayal that had brought us to this point. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Some trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired. Roberto had made his choice when he decided that his marriage vows meant nothing. Tomorrow, I would show him the consequences of that choice in a way he would never, ever forget. Thursday, October 12th, dawned clear and crisp, the kind of beautiful fall day that would have made me happy under different circumstances. Instead, I felt like I was preparing for battle as I stood in our small kitchen, carefully measuring the laxative powder that would change everything. I'd calculated the dosage precisely, enough to cause serious gastrointestinal distress, but not enough to require actual medical intervention. The carnitas were simmering perfectly, the cilantro was fresh and bright, the lime was perfectly ripe. I added the laxative to Roberto's portion of the meat, mixing it in thoroughly with extra salsa verde to mask any potential taste difference. As I wrapped his tacos in the usual foil, I included a love note like I always did. Hope these give you energy for your big day. Mi amor, te amo, Valentina. The irony of those words made me smile for the first time in weeks. Roberto woke up in his usual good mood, humming in the shower and taking extra time with his appearance. He emerged from the bathroom smelling like that expensive cologne, his hair perfectly styled, wearing his nicest work shirt. "Big day today, baby," he said, kissing my cheek. "This client is really demanding, but she pays so well it's worth the hassle." The ease with which he lied to my face was almost impressive in its shamelessness. I handed him his lunch with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "I made your tacos extra special today," I said, and it was the first completely honest thing either of us had said in months. Roberto grinned and pulled me close for a kiss that made my skin crawl. "You're the best wife a man could ask for, Val. I don't know what I'd do without you." In a few hours, he would find out exactly what he'd do without me, and it wouldn't be pretty. After Roberto left for his work, I called in sick to Casa Morales, telling Mrs. Morales that I had a family emergency that might take all day to resolve. In a way, it was true. My family was about to implode, and I needed to be there to manage the aftermath. I spent the morning cleaning our apartment obsessively, doing laundry, organizing drawers, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind focused on the timeline I'd memorized. Roberto would eat lunch at noon, arrive at Stephanie's by 2 p.m., and if my calculations were correct, the laxative would begin working around 3:30 p.m. I'd timed everything perfectly to ensure maximum impact during their most intimate moments together. At 1:45 p.m., I began my drive to Manhattan, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The family GPS app on our phones showed Roberto's location moving from Queens toward the Upper East Side, following the route I'd watched him take dozens of times over the past few weeks. I parked across the street from Stephanie's building at exactly 2:20 p.m., 5 minutes after Roberto's phone showed he'd arrived. The doorman was the same one who'd looked at me suspiciously during my delivery 3 weeks ago. But today, I was just another person in a car, invisible and anonymous. I settled in to wait, checking my phone every few minutes, my heart pounding with anticipation and terror about what I was about to unleash. At 3:42 p.m., my phone rang. Roberto's name flashed on the screen, and I could hear the panic in his voice before he even spoke. "Val, something's really wrong," he gasped, and I could hear him struggling with cramping pain. "I'm so sick. I think I have food poisoning or something terrible. I'm at a client's place and I can barely— Oh, God, I need to get to a hospital right now." In the background, I could hear a woman's voice, Stephanie, clearly distressed and trying to be helpful. "Which hospital, baby?" I asked, putting on my most concerned wife voice while secretly celebrating the success of my plan. "I'll meet you there immediately." Through his groans of pain, Roberto managed to tell me they were heading to Mount Sinai. "Hurry, Val. I've never felt this bad in my entire life. Something's really wrong with me." I hung up and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction before starting my car and heading to the hospital. I arrived at Mount Sinai's emergency room 25 minutes later, just as an ambulance was pulling up to the entrance. Through the back windows, I could see Roberto on a stretcher, clearly in severe distress, with Stephanie holding his hand and looking absolutely horrified. She was still wearing the silk robe I'd seen her in during my delivery that first day, hastily thrown over her clothes, and her perfectly styled hair was completely disheveled. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and she looked like she was about to be sick herself. This was even better than I'd imagined. Not only was Roberto suffering the consequences of his betrayal, but Stephanie was getting a front-row seat to the most disgusting and unromantic experience of her privileged life. I took a deep breath, put on my most worried and loving wife expression, and prepared to give the performance that would end my marriage and destroy Roberto's affair in one devastating blow. The automatic doors of the emergency room whooshed open as I rushed inside, just as the paramedics were wheeling Roberto through the entrance. "Roberto! Oh my God! What happened to you?" I cried, running to his side with tears streaming down my face. Stephanie looked at me in complete confusion, then growing horror as she began to realize who I must be. Who? Who are you? She stammered, backing away from the stretcher. I looked her directly in the eyes, making sure my voice carried across the crowded waiting room, and said, I'm his wife of 12 years. Who the hell are you? And why are you half naked with my husband? The entire emergency room fell silent, dozens of people turning to stare at the drama unfolding before them. The confrontation that followed was everything I'd dreamed of, and more. Stephanie's face went completely white as she stumbled backward, clutching her silk robe and looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Wife, she whispered, looking between Roberto and me like she was seeing ghosts. Roberto, you told me you were divorced. You said your ex-wife lived in California and you never spoke to her. Roberto, despite being in obvious physical agony, looked absolutely terrified of me for the first time in our marriage. Val, I can explain everything, he started weakly, but another wave of intestinal cramping cut him off mid-sentence. The nurses were trying to get medical information while patients and families throughout the waiting room openly stared at our soap opera, some even recording with their phones. Explain what, Roberto? I said, my voice carrying across the busy ER and growing stronger with each word. Explain why you're here with this woman instead of fixing air conditioning. Explain why she's in a bathrobe at 3 p.m. Explain why you've been lying to me for months about where you spend your Thursdays. I turned to Stephanie with mock concern and curiosity. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't catch your name. Are you one of Roberto's regular clients? Because he's told me so much about his demanding Thursday customers. Stephanie tried to slip away toward the exit, but I wasn't finished with her yet. Oh no, don't leave now. I think we need to have a conversation about my husband's air conditioning emergencies and why they seem to require you to be undressed. A doctor approached our group, looking completely bewildered by the personal drama erupting in his medical facility. Mrs. He looked at me questioningly, clearly trying to figure out who was actually responsible for the patient. Cruz, I supplied helpfully, showing him my driver's license and insurance card. I'm Roberto's wife and emergency contact. This woman was apparently with him when he became mysteriously ill. I gestured toward Stephanie with the kind of fake politeness that made my intentions crystal clear. I'm sorry. I didn't catch your name earlier. Are you a friend of my husband's? A colleague? Because I'm trying to understand why you were together when he got sick. Stephanie looked like she wanted to crawl under the nearest gurney and disappear forever. The doctor cleared his throat professionally, trying to refocus on the medical emergency despite the obvious personal drama. Ma'am, your husband appears to be suffering from severe food poisoning or a serious gastrointestinal episode. We need to run some tests immediately and get him stabilized. I nodded with appropriate spousal concern, playing my role perfectly. Of course, doctor. He ate lunch at home today. Carnitas tacos that I prepared myself with my own hands. They were perfectly fine when I made them this morning. I looked meaningfully at Stephanie, then back at the doctor. Though I suppose he might have eaten something else later in the day. Roberto, did you eat anything at your client's house? Anything that might have caused this reaction? Roberto could barely speak through his pain and embarrassment, but the look of dawning suspicion in his eyes told me he was starting to piece together the timeline and realize that his illness wasn't as random as it seemed. Stephanie finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I can't. I didn't know. Roberto, you told me you were divorced. You said your wife lived across the country and you hadn't spoken in years. She was backing toward the exit now, her perfect composure completely shattered by the reality of the situation. Divorced? I laughed with genuine amusement. Honey, we just celebrated our 12th wedding anniversary last month. Roberto, show her the wedding ring you're still wearing. Show her the pictures of our anniversary dinner in your wallet. The waiting room had become completely silent except for my voice. Dozens of people watching this real-life drama unfold like it was better than anything on television. I was loving every second of it, every humiliating moment that Roberto and Stephanie were experiencing. You know what I find interesting? I continued, addressing Stephanie directly. My husband has been complaining about his demanding Thursday clients for months. Rich women who call him for air conditioning emergencies, who are so difficult to deal with. I guess now I understand why those appointments were so stressful for him. It must be exhausting, maintaining a relationship with someone while lying to your wife about it. Stephanie ran for the exit, then, pushing through the crowd of onlookers and disappearing into the Manhattan afternoon, leaving Roberto alone with me and a room full of witnesses to his infidelity and humiliation. As the medical staff wheeled him away for tests and treatment, I sat in the waiting room and made a very public phone call to my lawyer friend, Maria Santos, speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear every word. Maria, it's Valentina Cruz. I need to file for divorce immediately. Adultery, fraud, emotional abuse. Yes, I have witnesses. About 50 people in Mount Sinai's emergency room just saw my husband's girlfriend run away when she discovered he was married. Can you meet me tomorrow morning to start the paperwork? I hung up and smiled, knowing that by tomorrow morning, half of Queens would know what Roberto had done and what had happened to him as a result. The aftermath of my revenge was everything I'd hoped for and more. Roberto spent 6 hours in the hospital getting IV fluids and tests, and when he was finally released, he came home to find divorce papers waiting on our kitchen table, along with a note that said, I hope your Thursday client was worth it. Don't bother trying to explain. I saw you with her weeks ago. He tried to convince me that the laxative attack was just a coincidence, but we both knew the truth. Stephanie had blocked his number, refused to see him, and according to the building's doorman, who Mrs. Morales' cousin happened to know, she'd been telling everyone in her building about the married man who got violently ill during sex and brought his crazy wife to the hospital. Within 3 months, I was awarded the apartment, half of Roberto's business assets, and significant alimony in our divorce settlement. Roberto's HVAC business suffered badly when word spread through our neighborhood about what had happened. Apparently, cheating husbands don't make trustworthy repairmen, and several of his regular clients canceled their service contracts. He tried to rebuild his reputation, but the story of his hospital humiliation had become neighborhood legend, told and retold with growing embellishments at every barbershop, beauty salon, and corner store in Queens. Stephanie had moved to New Jersey and changed jobs, unable to handle the embarrassment of being associated with the incident. I kept working at Casa Morales, where I was treated like a hero for standing up for myself and refusing to be a victim. Mrs. Morales gave me a raise and promoted me to assistant manager, saying that anyone clever enough to plan such perfect revenge deserved to be in charge of something. The other women in the neighborhood started coming to me for advice about their own relationship problems, and I discovered I had a talent for helping people see through lies and manipulation. Every Thursday, I still make carnitas tacos for the lunch special at the restaurant, always with a smile, always remembering the day I served my cheating husband exactly what he deserved. And whenever I see that bottle of hot sauce on the tables, I think about how sometimes the perfect revenge is just a matter of the right ingredients, perfect timing, and the courage to follow through with what needs to be done.